Welcome to Ms. Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Ms. Peepers. Let's talk about books. Today we're going to discuss Careless in Red by Elizabeth George. Careless in Red is a British mystery by an American author, interestingly. It's part of a series about Inspector Thomas Linley and his Sergeant Barbara Havers. And this is probably book 15 or so, if I remember correctly. I'm not reading them in any kind of order. I've got a couple on my shelf. I have one or two, I think, in my TBR still. So I'm just kind of reading them as I find them in the used bookstore. Each book qualifies as a standalone, though there is continuous storyline and development of the main characters from book to book. In this particular book, it's a little bit different from typical Inspector Linley stories in that Linley is not the main detective. He found the body on the 43rd day of his walk. In this book, Thomas Linley, who is typically the chief investigator in the books in this series, is recently widowed. His wife was killed in a random shooting, and presumably in the previous book, which I did not read, and he is grieving. And so he has quit his job at Scotland Yard. He is decided to just walk. He's trying to clear his head. He doesn't know what else to do with himself. He's having trouble processing the loss of his wife, Helen. And so he is walking through woods, through countryside, wherever his whim takes him. And on the 43rd day of his walk, he finds a body. And as much as he just wants to keep walking, he can't. He knows that something has gone wrong. There's either been an accident or something more sinister. And so he stops. He ascertains that the person is in fact dead and goes to a nearby cottage trying to find a telephone because he has brought basically nothing with him. The owner of that cottage, of course, gets involved as well. They go to the police station because she doesn't have a phone either, and an investigation begins. And it is determined very quickly that the man found at the base of the cliff has in fact been murdered. And so what's interesting about this story is that it is a murder mystery in the traditional sense of we have a body, we have an investigation, we're following clues, we're learning about the different people around the person who died. His name is Santo. And yet the person who is typically the main character, Thomas Linley, is on the periphery of the investigation because he has turned in his badge. Now, his superiors at Scotland Yard have not actually accepted his resignation, in that they know he's grieving and they want to make sure that he actually means it, which of course says a lot for his reputation in the organization. And his sergeant, Barbara Havers, with whom he has been working for quite a few years at this point, is waiting impatiently to hear from him. So once the investigating officer, D.I. Beatrice Hannaford, realizes who Linley is, because of course the story was all over the papers, she quickly eliminates him as a suspect and enlists him very much against his will to help her in a semi-official capacity. And what's interesting about this is that he wants nothing to do with the case, but he can't help himself and does his own investigation sort of parallel to hers. So there's this conflict between the official officer who is actually assigned to this case and Linley, who has the police training but is technically a civilian in this case. There's a lot of tension there where he has an idea of what he wants to chase down, and because technically speaking, if he were an active officer, he would be a higher rank than she is. Because he's not, he's trying to have it both ways, not really realizing that he's trying to have it both ways. And it's and throughout this entire thing, he keeps getting pulled back into just the wells of grief that he is experiencing. So this really is on the one hand, a traditional murder mystery in that we have a body, we have suspects, we're going through learning about people's lives and their relationships and their secrets, and we have an investigator who's trying to put all of this into some semblance of order. But then we also, next to that, have a story of grief where Linley is constantly reminded of his wife's death. He's fighting going back to his normal life because he doesn't feel like his normal life is really there anymore. He's hiding out from his friends and family, who he does check in eventually, but he's hiding out from his friends and family because he doesn't want their pity. He doesn't know what to do with all of these emotions that he's never really had to experience before. And so it's a very complex story. On top of that, the Inspector Linley books often have a theme of social class, because Thomas Linley comes from a wealthy family with a lot of privilege, and his Sergeant Havers comes from a lower income family. So there's some clash there, although the two of them do form a solid working relationship. But there is a healthy amount of tension in that Havers calls Linley on his privilege quite frequently, because he doesn't, even though he is in the police force, which puts him in contact with people from all backgrounds and all walks of life, he still has these unconscious biases that he doesn't realize that he has until his partner points it out to him. And that exists in this book as well, to an extent. And then the main mystery itself gets quite complex in that not only does pretty much everyone have a pretty in-depth secret, intense secret, that not only does everyone involved have a fairly intense secret that they feel very strongly that they need to keep from everyone, even the police, even if it would clear their names in some cases. There's one character in particular who is keeping a secret that has nothing to do with the murder, and yet refuses to say anything, even to the police, even knowing that it will clear them. And it's just such a fascinating character study, because on the one hand, you're like, why wouldn't you take the spotlight off of yourself? And on the other hand, you're like, okay, I get it. You don't want this to be widely known. And you don't, and this character doesn't trust the police. Anyway, it's just such a well crafted and complex story. I mean, and this is not a small book, as you can see. It's it's over 600 pages, and yet it reads very quickly because it is an engaging mystery. It is well written. It is written in a straightforward sort of way while discussing those complex topics and themes. It's just a high quality mystery. It's been a while since I've read Elizabeth George, to be honest. This year I've been picking up British mysteries again, which I haven't done in some time. For me, because I grew up watching adaptations of the Inspector Linley mysteries and other British mysteries, and also reading those books, it's kind of like coming home again. It's a very cozy space for me, even amidst all of the challenging topics that are in here. Speaking of content warnings, as I mentioned, this does discuss grief in depth. There is a little bit about miscarriage. There's a little bit about infidelity. Actually, there's a fair amount about infidelity. And then, of course, there is a violent murder. And all in all, I'm happy to return to this series after quite a long hiatus. And I do recommend this book as well as the other Inspector Linley stories. So tell me, have you read Careless and Red or any other Inspector Linley mysteries or anything else by Elizabeth George? If so, what did you think about it? And either way, I will see you in the next one.